To me, the Vikings don't have hope any longer. Sam Darnold is bottom 4 quarterback going into the season.
Sam Darnold will then be a proven winner, leadership that everybody would want out of a franchise guy.
At one point in time, Sam Darnold was seen as one of the biggest busts in NFL history. He was historically terrible for the Jets and came up with one of the most embarrassing quotes of all time. Then he bounced around from team to team, missed games with one of the weirdest injuries ever, and was on pace to be out of the NFL by next season. But then, something changed. One lucky event happened that not only saved Sam Darnold's career, but launched the Vikings into their best season of all time. How did Sam Darnold and the Vikings shock the world? Did anyone see this coming? And why are the Vikings still considering moving on from him after this season? But more importantly, what is Sam Darnold's future going to look like following this season? So before we get to the content, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications because we're so close to getting to 1 million subscribers. And now that we got all that out of the way, work! We've been dominating when we've been making picks for the NBA and the NFL on Prize Picks. If you haven't played Prize Picks before and you're really good at guessing player projections, you can make yourself a decent amount of money. I give away my picks on my Instagram story at @TheFlightMike, and right now when you use my promo code Mikerophone and make an entry of $5 or more, you'll get a free $50. And thank you Prize Picks for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? 1 year ago, the consensus opinion on Sam Darnold was that he was one of the biggest busts of the 2010s. Coming out of USC, Sam Darnold was one of, if not the best quarterback in the NFL draft, depending on who you ask. Sure, Baker Mayfield just won the Heisman Trophy and was more NFL ready, but Sam Darnold had more potential. He was just 20 years old at the time of the 2018 NFL draft and would be 21 by the start of the season. He was a clay block of a quarterback who just needed an offensive genius to mold him into an elite quarterback. The 20-year-old sophomore led the Pac-12 in passing yards while leading the USC Trojans to their best record since 2008. It made sense why scouts coveted him so much. But then, the worst possible thing happened to him. He was drafted by the New York Jets.
Could have been and would have been the #1 pick had things gone the way everybody thought.
But that was about as much hype as Darnold and the Jets would have his entire New York tenure. On his first ever pass as a New York Jet, Sam Darnold threw this terrible pick six, and the rest was history with New York. He missed games with mono, which in case you didn't know is typically a disease that teenagers get when they kiss strangers, and also one of the most embarrassing quotes you'll ever hear.
Seen ghosts.
There are so many words to describe the Sam Darnold era in New York. It was terrible, underwhelming, abysmal, and disappointing, and at the time you didn't really know who to point the blame finger at. Because on one hand, Sam Darnold's offensive genius was one of the biggest hacks in the NFL, Adam Gase, a man that got his name to fame for crafting an incredible offense around Peyton Manning and the 2013 Denver Broncos. It's kind of funny that someone would think that he was responsible for that type of success, and it wasn't Peyton Manning that was. But on top of that, the New York Jets front office just didn't know how to build a team around Darnold. You take a look at the 2019 New York Jets roster, for instance, and Sam Darnold's top targets was Jamison Crowder and Robbie Chosen, who actually had decent seasons given their circumstances. But in 2019, the New York Jets made one of the biggest mistakes ever and decided to sign Le'Veon Bell to give Sam Darnold some additional help. Le'Veon Bell would flame out in New York, and in 2020, things would go from bad to worse. The New York Jets were prime contenders to potentially draft Trevor Lawrence following their paltry 2020 season. But as a result of one victory versus the LA Rams that season, they went from potential #1 overall pick to the #2 overall pick. This should have been a sign for the New York Jets organization because they still had Sam Darnold on a rookie scale contract, and they were about to encounter one of the most transcendent draft classes of all time. There were plenty of holes that needed to be filled for this team. There was a variety of different directions you could have gone in. Kyle Pitts was supposed to be the most transcendent tight end to ever enter the NFL draft. Jamar Chase was a surefire wide receiver 1. Penei Sewell was the player that I was begging the Jets to take at the time. But alas, the Jets decided to chase that pot of gold once again. Think that if Zach Wilson can consistently replicate this throw he made in the draft combine in his pro day, then the New York Jets were going to be just fine. Following this, it was traded to the Carolina Panthers for pennies on the dollar. And in the beginning of his stint with the Panthers, he was actually quite decent. But following Christian McCaffrey's injury and then subsequent trade, Sam Darnold came back to earth. He would split time with Baker Mayfield as the starter in 2020 before moving on to the 49ers to back up Brock Purdy in 2023. The one thing that Sam had going for him at this time was he was just 26 years old by the time his season ended in San Francisco. To put that into perspective, Michael Penix and Bo Nix, who are both rookie quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL draft, are 24 years old. I say this to emphasize the point that maybe, just maybe, giving up on a quarterback who showcased an absurd amount of talent in just 2 seasons at USC might not be a good idea. I mean, the Jets traded Sam Darnold to the Panthers in 2021 when he was only 24 years old. So while before the 2024 NFL season we might have seen Sam Darnold as a perennial backup and draft bust, he was still relatively young and he could still be developed. But nobody believed this. Even the Minnesota Vikings, who despite signing Sam Darnold in the offseason to a $10 million deal, saw him as a placeholder for eventual franchise quarterback JJ McCarthy. Now, it's important to note that Sam Darnold was always the projected week 1 starter, and the plan was for JJ McCarthy to get adjusted to the NFL and the Vikings offense. Then, when the time was right, he was going to start over Sam Darnold. But then, something changed.
Vikings rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy will miss the entirety of the 2024 season. Torn meniscus repaired today by Chris Larson.
You heard that correctly. The number 10 overall pick in the most recent NFL draft would miss the entire year, meaning Sam Darnold was set to start the entire season for the Minnesota Vikings. And to say that the NFL had no expectations for the Vikings would be a massive understatement. Just listen to some of the NFL analysts describe the situation in Minnesota as one of, if not the worst situation in the NFL.
Got hope. To me, the Vikings don't have hope any longer. Sam Darnold is bottom 4 quarterback going into the season. I put Sam Darnold in the category of probably Aiden O'Connell. Quarterbacks that don't give you a ton of hope, but also aren't necessarily proven to be good. Darnold's 10-20 in his last 4 years. He's 21-35 over his whole NFL career.
There's times where I miss on my takes, and I'll always admit that, but if there's one take that I nailed in the summer, it's the fact that if there was a quarterback that had a great opportunity to resurrect his career, it would be Sam Darnold. I mean, this was the greatest situation for him. It's the best wide receiver core he's ever received. He got great run support. He has an offensive genius as a head coach. I didn't anticipate Brian Flores completely suffocating opposing teams with his defense, but then you also factor in the fact that TJ Hawkinson was going to come back at some point, and you have the greatest situation Sam Darnold was ever placed in his career. But people didn't just think the Vikings were going to be bad. They didn't just think the Vikings would be the worst team in the NFC North. People seriously thought that the Vikings were going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. And at the same time, I wouldn't blame someone for having that point of view. Sure, they have the aforementioned offensive weapons that I stated, but that doesn't matter if you don't have a quarterback capable of getting them the ball. The problem with Sam Darnold has always been the fact that he liked to play hero ball, and it resulted in erratic turnovers. But when you have playmakers that are consistently dependable, hero ball tends to be a very good thing for those players. Trusting in your wide receivers to make plays tend to work out really well for said players. And well, that's what would happen in the 2024 season. To start off the season, Sam Darnold and the Vikings were simply unstoppable. Not only had the Vikings gone 5-0, but Sam Darnold was playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He had well over 1,000 passing yards, 11 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions, and his passer rating was one of the best in the league. He was unstoppable. Then, the Vikings lost to the Lions and Rams in back-to-back weeks, and just when you thought that the Vikings were capturing lightning in a bottle, the hype train had come to a grinding halt. Or did it? Over the course of the next 9 games, the Minnesota Vikings had gone 9-0, and Sam Darnold didn't just become the first Vikings quarterback to throw 5 touchdown passes in a game in 2 decades. He became the first Vikings quarterback in franchise history to win 14 games in a season. Sam Darnold was the quarterback of the Vikings for 1 season, and he had accomplished what Kirk Cousins, Fran Tarkenton, Dante Culpepper, and Tommy Kramer couldn't. He also had managed to sweep the Vikings rivals, the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears, stomped out Kirk Cousins in his return to Minnesota, and if it wasn't evidenced enough by his accomplishments that the fan base and locker room love him, just take a look at this video. Now, obviously, we don't know what the rest of the Vikings season looks like. Maybe the Vikings lose in their first playoff game. Maybe they make a deep run. Heck, Who knows? Maybe Sam Darnold pulls off another historic achievement and delivers Minnesota their first ever Super Bowl. But one thing is for certain, no matter how the Vikings season ends, Sam Darnold's future is very uncertain. Technically, Sam Darnold is a free agent at the end of this season. The Minnesota Vikings signed him to be a bridge QB. They were planning on starting JJ McCarthy in the middle of this season. The plan was never to have Sam Darnold play for an entire season, but the Vikings didn't want to waste any time, and they wanted to be very aggressive in solving their problem at the quarterback position, which gives the Vikings a lot of options to handle Sam Darnold. I think the most likely scenario that happens is the Vikings franchise tag Sam Darnold to keep him around for one more season to give JJ McCarthy one more year to learn the position. That is if they even decide to keep JJ McCarthy. The truth is that the Minnesota Vikings currently have an absurd amount of depth at the quarterback position, and whichever direction they do decide to go, odds are they will have a franchise quarterback. Whether it's Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy is the only question. The Vikings have so much depth at the QB position that despite their depth, Daniel Jones decided to sign with them this year. Now, I want to explore the potential paths that the Vikings could go down. One that is certainly possible is the Vikings signing Sam Darnold to a long-term contract and then trading JJ McCarthy.
I think the most important question is, like, how does JJ McCarthy compare to the quarterbacks that are in draft this year? And if he's as good or better, according to the talent evaluators, then he's worth as high as you want.
I'm not a draft analyst. I feel confident saying if JJ McCarthy were in this year's draft without any injury questions or anything like that, he would be the first pick.
Now, if you listen to pundits and analysts, trading McCarthy and signing Sam Darnold long-term is the best option. And honestly, I kind of get it. If you trade JJ McCarthy now, you're getting a semi-young franchise quarterback in Sam Darnold, who's already shown that he's capable of leading one of the best teams in the NFL. With that extra pick, you can draft a cornerback to shore up one of the worst passing defenses in the NFL. And that way, Brian Flores doesn't need to run prevent defense on each and every single play practically. Maybe you draft a lineman to protect your new investment. Who knows? Plus, you still have a capable backup in Daniel Jones on the roster, so if Sam does get injured, DJ is capable of starting for a few weeks. Let's flip the script. What if the Vikings don't want to pay Sam Darnold, but they don't want to start JJ McCarthy yet? Well, in that case, you would franchise tag him. A part of me wonders whether or not Sam Darnold would hold out, given the situation that he's placed in, given the fact that this man is clearly traumatized from playing for multiple terrible organizations that didn't know how to utilize his talents. So I wonder if as a result, Sam Darnold would give the Vikings a little bit of a break. Maybe the Vikings could convince Sam Darnold to take a Baker Mayfield-like contract as a result of his understanding that the Vikings literally made him who he is. Baker Mayfield has one of the best contracts in the NFL. The man currently gets paid an average of $33.3 million a year, which makes him the 18th highest paid QB in the entire NFL. And the reason why Baker accepted that type of contract is he saw what would happen if he ended up on another roster with no weapons to throw the football to, or with a head coach that didn't know how to make the most of his talents. So taking a pay cut and only getting paid $33.3 million, but at the same time having Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to throw the football to, at least at the time, but now having Bucky Irving and Rachaad White to depend on in the running game is so valuable that I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Darnold took a similar type of pay cut if it meant being able to stay with the Vikings even longer. But at the same time, when you hear Kevin O'Connell talk about JJ McCarthy, he seems very excited about this young man's potential.
This guy is so motivated and so dialed in. As excited as I was to draft him, he's confirmed everything that I hope to see, not only early on through training camp, through his performance last Saturday, but he should, our fan base and everyone should just be, excited about the fact that we've got our young franchise quarterback.
This is another real possibility, but it is entirely up to what Sam Darnold wants to do and how deep the Vikings can go. Does he want to remain with the coaching staff that revived his career, take slightly less money, and stay with Minnesota for what might just be one more bridge season? Or does he want to use his leverage to go to a team willing to flip draft capital for him and sign the biggest contract he possibly can get? There have been times in NFL history where we've seen quarterbacks hit free agency and sign with the wrong teams for very big money, and it ended up destroying their careers. 2 years after leading the Philadelphia Eagles to a Super Bowl, Nick Foles signed a 4-year, $88 million contract with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He only played in 4 games with the Jags, and he was terrible in those games, throwing for 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, and the Jags would go winless. He'd get traded to the Bears and would be a backup for the Bears, then a backup for the Colts, and then he would retire. Going back even further, you take a look at Brock Osweiler. Brock Osweiler was supposed to be the Denver Broncos succession plan, and it's very easy to see why. He performed really well whenever Peyton Manning went down to injury, and as a result, the Houston Texans signed him to a huge contract in the 2016 offseason. He was absolutely terrible with the Texans, completing 59% of his passes, throwing for more interceptions than touchdowns, so as a result, you would get traded to the Cleveland Browns, eventually get cut by the Browns, sign a 1-year contract with the Broncos, get cut by the Broncos, and then reunite with his good old buddy Adam Gase on the Miami Dolphins in 2018 before calling it a career. Historically, whenever a quarterback has one really incredible season because he's surrounded with an incredible supporting cast, typically the best option for him is to take a pay cut and remain in that situation no matter what, or try to find another situation that's similar to that. Going to a team that has no assets at all whatsoever, no one to throw the football to, but is willing to pay you top dollar is a surefire way to find yourself out of the NFL within the next year or two. But I think this decision is more than just on Sam Darnold. It's also on the Minnesota Vikings. It's a very weak offseason to be in the market for a quarterback, and the New York Giants and Las Vegas Raiders both need a quarterback, in addition to the Tennessee Titans, New York Jets, New Orleans Saints, and Seattle Seahawks. When you consider the fact that your top quarterback prospects are Shedeur Sanders and Cameron Ward, which, don't get me wrong, can be great quarterbacks, but the QB depth isn't nearly what it was last year, then I wouldn't blame any team for giving up their first round pick or even a second round pick to be able to trade for JJ McCarthy. So let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think about all this? How do you feel about Sam Darnold's resurgent season? Do you think it's a fluke? Do you think it's sustainable? Do you think the Vikings should sign Sam Darnold? Or do you think Sam Darnold should leave to another team in the offseason? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.